We've had a request, believe it or not, by Sister Violet Melhorn. So we're gonna do this. The rest of you just excuse us, okay?
There are some people who say you cannot tell whether you are saved or whether all is well. They say we only can hope and trust that it's so. I was there when it happened, so I guess I ought to know. Yes, I know when Jesus saved me,
saved my soul.
The very moment He forgave me,
made me whole.
He took away my heavy burden. Lord, He gave me peace within. Satan can't make me doubt it. It's real and I'm gonna shout it. I was there when it happened, and I guess I ought to know.
I don't care who tells me salvation is not real, though the world may argue that we cannot feel the heavy burdens lifted and the vile sins gone. I was there when it happened, and I guess I ought to know.
Yes, I know when Jesus saved me,
saved my soul.
The very moment He forgave me,
made me whole.
He took away my heavy burden. Lord, He gave me peace within. Satan can't make me doubt
I
it.
won't doubt it.
Real and I'm gonna shout
I'm
it.
gonna shout it.
I was there when it happened, and I guess I ought to know. I was there when it happened, and I guess I ought to know.
Amen.
In the time that you gave me, did I give all I could give? Did I love all I could love? Did I live all I could live? Since I trusted in your blood that was strong enough to save me, did I do all I could do in the time that you gave me?
In the time that you gave me, did I face the devil down? Did I make him turn away? Did I always stand my ground? If today should be the day you should decide to take me, did I do all I could do in the time that you gave me?
Oh, and I'll never know till it's over, but I want to fly on your shoulder. I might have strayed from the path, I might have gone a little crazy. Did I do all I could do in the time that you gave me? And as the hourglass empties, well, it won't even faze me. if I did all I could do in the time that you gave me.
I want to do all I can do in the time that you gave me.
I want to thank you all for singing that song, and I want everybody to know that you had the most wonderful Christian mother that I ever met in my life, and I know she would be so proud of your boys.
Thank you. I appreciate
I worked with her 5 days a week, so I knew her pretty well.
it. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that testimony.
Has anybody else got a testimony? You figure I have to be done at 7, so everything you do knocks off of that, right? You don't believe me. On Wednesday, I do need to be done at 7 because of Awana, so you're safe there. So anybody want to take some time off with a testimony? Clock's ticking. How old is your mom now, Lloyd?
92.
And she's still hanging on. Yeah, but
Be 93 this month.
wow. That in heaven that'll fix everything, won't it? That I did not, of course, know her, but I did get a chance a little bit while she was still at home, and had some a few times when she knew I was the pastor. I had to introduce myself a couple of times, but I'm glad I also got a chance to meet her. Any prayer requests tonight? Okay, Gary. How many of you have an unspoken prayer request? All right, there's always a room full.
Remember Brian Sexton, the passing of his dad, remember him, his mother, his family.
So I went over there and visited them this week, and they had a house full of grandkids, and got up on a little bit of history, just talking to them. It's neat when you're there with somebody who's saved. He said that his dad had been sick for a little bit, had Parkinson's, and that was starting to take over control. And then he got COVID, and that just took him home. But, of course, Brian's going to miss his dad. But just like we were talking about, he also knows that his dad doesn't have Parkinson's disease anymore. And what the cathedrals, years ago, we had them in church right before, before they got super big. And one of their piano players had cancer. And he wrote a song about the ultimate healing. Is that, God is never defeated. If you have cancer, you will get healed, right? It's just a matter of how he's going to heal you, right? Leaving this body, for a Christian, it is a healing. Not only are you not going to get sick anymore, guess what else you're not going to do anymore? Sin. So that would be the ultimate healing. And I think that viewing is tomorrow as well. But I enjoyed hearing a little bit of history of his family, and her mom's still going strong. I think she'll be 94 this year. Any other prayer requests tonight? Okay. All right, we'll do that. Pray for Sawyer as how long does he have to have that heart monitor? Okay, so we'll pray that they didn't find anything. All right, anybody else tonight? Okay, Father, thank you for this evening. Thank you for the good songs that we heard. Lord, thank you for a testimony of a good mom. And Lord, I just thank you for the memory that she had in this church. And Lord, she was faithful in bringing her family. And Lord, we are benefits of that with two of her sons coming to church and being faithful servants here. And just I want to, like Violet, just reiterate the thankfulness of that. Lord, I just pray that you would be with her, Lord, and I just pray in your time, Lord, she will experience that ultimate healing. Lord, I pray for Brian's family and Louise's family, Lord, as they both are experiencing loss this week, Lord, and that you would comfort Lord, it's also a time of looking back at a person's life and being thankful for being able to be around them and to enjoy them. Lord, I think of Sawyer tonight. Any parent that's experienced anything with their kids where there's any kind of testing going on or whatevs is always hard. Lord, we know all across this country, Lord, some parents facing something they didn't expect today. Lord, we just ask that you would be with Sawyer, that you would help it to be something he can just grow out of and it wouldn't be a big deal. And Lord, that you would bring peace and comfort. Thank you for Gary and his family and mentioning prayer for them. Lord, thank you for the unspoken prayer requests, the things in our life that we just have to keep to ourselves sometimes. And Lord, that bitterness is a struggle of life. Lord, that it may be tomorrow we're on a mountaintop and somebody else is in a valley. And I just want to thank you that you do give us reprieve from that. And Lord, I pray that you would show grace in those prayers and you would answer them according to your will. And Lord, just thank you for the group of young people that are over there this evening and all the teachers that are going to be faithfully over there tonight. And Lord, as Awana starts, and Lord, I pray that we may be able to impact those young people for you. And I pray to be with the preaching and teaching over there this evening. And Lord, as we look at 1 Samuel, we love you. We ask this in your precious name. Amen. And if you go with me to 1 Samuel, and I think I'll get my spot here in verse, we'll go ahead and jump up here in chapter 19. 1 Samuel, let me turn this thing on. 1 Samuel chapter 19. You know, a good idea is to kind of read ahead a little bit. 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, to me, are probably one of the easiest, other than the Gospels, are probably one of the easiest places in the Bible to read. Of course, Genesis is pretty exciting. There's a lot happening in 1 and 2 Samuel. Then when you get to 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, a lot of it is redundant, just total different way. But I love these two books. There's a lot of history in it. You know, and just being able to go verse by verse through each one just makes it a little bit more real. We'll start in verse 1. And Saul spake to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants that they should kill David, because sometimes when you're not happy spiritually, I just got these glasses are a little dirty. I can't see through them. Sometimes when we're not where we're supposed to be spiritually, we're not happy, so therefore we don't want anybody else to be happy, right? So David's in a good spot with the Lord now. God's using him. Saul is not in a good spot. No, and I really do honestly believe Saul's a believer. There's a debate whether or not Saul was saved. First off, I'm not the judge of that, but there's a lot of things that indicate why in the world would God pick the first king of Israel to not be somebody that was a believer. So I really do believe he was saved. Not only is there a debate in that, I'm just going to throw this out for free. Do you know that there's lots of things that are not written in stone as far as to people's interpretation, like Jonah? Did he die in the whale, or was he alive during that whole process? I'm alive the whole way through. Now, some people don't believe that. There's some commentaries that don't teach that. There's some commentaries teach that he died in the belly of the whale, right? So, and those are things that have not been fixed, and they won't be fixed, and those don't have any bearing on anybody's salvation. It's just neat to dive into some of those sometimes. But Saul here is actively trying to go after David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David, and Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself unto the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. So Jonathan knew that Saul was going to try and go after David. So what did Jonathan do? Now, of course, David is loyal. Jonathan's loyal to his dad, but he also has a friend, right? And so he has to choose, is he going to stay on the side of his dad, or is he going to stay on the side of his friend? And sometimes those are difficult things to do. Sometimes you got to say no to family. Sometimes if family's not where they need to be and they're not making the right decisions, there may come a point where you can't be loyal to them. and you have to be loyal to the Bible instead. That's not an easy place to be, but he has to make a decision. I mean, he's the king. This is actually treason what he's doing, because he's going behind the king's back and he's telling an enemy and giving him heads up, but he has to make a decision. What is he going to do? Is he going to stay with his dad, or is he going to stay on the side of God? And those are things that come our way. And I promise you this, is that although that is difficult, you will always win choosing the path that God's on. And sometimes you just have to say, hey, you know, I have to separate myself from this because you're not going the right way. And Jonathan had to do that with his dad, and he went and warned David. And here's something you can think about that too. Even in our lives, especially these young people coming up, you know, the older you get, you win some battles in your life. You know, there's some things that you see you know, when you were younger, that you made some mistakes and God helped you. And now that you're older, there's young people all around us. And you know what David's doing? He's protecting his friend, right? He's not related to David. He's just a friend, and he's saying, listen, you're about ready to step in something that's going to hurt you. I want to help you with this information. Do you know that is something that we ought to be a part of discipleship? Is that very same thing? The older ones coming alongside the younger ones? Or if you see, now look, it's very difficult to correct somebody. You do it in the right heart, with the right intent. If you really want to help them in the right way, to give them heads up and say, listen, you know, that's an area that might cause you some trouble, can be received well if it's done well. And here Jonathan has given David this heads up about an enemy. And I will go out and I will stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see, that I will tell thee. And Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he has not sinned against thee, because his works have been to thee, thee word very good. So he's standing up for what's right, and he's saying, hey, Dad, God's hand's on him. You know, and you shouldn't do evil. Now, you talk about a difficult situation for a son to correct the dad, but when it comes between the Bible, you always stand on the Bible, right? Okay, and that's what he's doing. And he's saying, Dad, I think that this is going to be a mistake. I don't think you should do that. Verse 5, for he did put his life in his hand and slew the Philistine, and the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. Thou sawest it, and didst rejoice, wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood to slay David without a cause. See, he's reminding his dad of the time when he was more in tune with the walk with the Lord. He was saying, Dad, when you were over here, you couldn't talk enough about David. You couldn't brag on him enough. I mean, you're the one that pointed out, you know, the success that he had with the Philistines. Now what's changed? So in our life, we may move here, but I want you to understand God doesn't move, right? He is always going to stay in the same place. And we can look back at past victories, things that we used to do back when, you know, and if you look, your Christian life oftentimes does this, right? Go back into places where you were close to God. Look what you were doing then and do that same thing again. And you know what you'll find? You can get in the same place again. See, over here, there was a time, you can't sing somebody's praise one minute and then, you know, call them evil the next, right? I mean, there's things that got in the way there that shouldn't have gotten in the way that have changed that. And he's saying, now look, now don't forget how God used him. Don't forget what he did. Don't forget what God was doing. And now this very same person you're against, you might want to look at that, right? You might want to see, why do I feel that way? Okay? There's some things happened that has caused him to not like David. Okay, but that hasn't changed God's working in David's life or God's working in Israel's life. Saul was just in a place, and sometimes, you know, I've had to remind people, you know, and say, now look, you know, just not too long ago, that person was, and now all of a sudden, well, a marriage is a good way. I mean, Jake just got married. Everybody on your first day of marriage, nobody thinks about divorce, right? If you do, you're in real big trouble. If that's going through your mind the day you get married, right? Then all of a sudden, 10 years down the road, the very same people that have sparkles in their eyes and doves in the air, all of a sudden trying to kill each other. And I think, well, what did you have then? Go find that and hold on to that, right? I mean, because there was a time when you didn't feel that way. Isn't it odd? Isn't it odd that at one moment you could love somebody so much and be so overwhelmed with that, and the next moment you never want to see them again? And sometimes you've got to think about the ups and downs of that, right? And the beauty of God is his love for us never changes, or we'd all be in trouble, right? Okay, verse 6. And Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan, and Saul sware, as the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. Now here's something. He didn't mean that, because it didn't last long. A lesson here, we shouldn't say things that we don't mean. You know, something that older saints in the Lord grilled in my head in ministry was, let your yea be yea and your nay, nay. If you say you're going to do something, do it. If you're going to commit to something, then you commit to it. Once you say you're going to do, even so much. And again, there's times in your life when you're closer to God than in others. But I remember being taught that early on in the ministry. And I remember I needed a car. I went and saw a car, and I liked the car, and I told the guy I would buy that car. And then right after that, I ran into another guy who had a better car, and I didn't buy that car because I told the other guy I would. Now, either that was foolish, maybe I could have, how would he know, right? I could have come up with some other idea, but I remember in your mind thinking, you know, if God wants me to do that, then I can't go back on it. Even if I tell you I'm going to do something and it changes, and I might even have to put myself out to keep this word, but then I have to just trust God that he's going to balance that out, right? So if I go ahead and buy this car because I gave that man my word, can I not then trust God to balance out the fact that I paid more money? Well, sure you can. You can then cash that check with the Lord and say, okay, Lord, this is hard. I really want to just go buy this car, but I can't because I gave this man my word. So I'm going to do this because you asked me to do this, and I'm going to leave the balance of this in your hands to figure out. So, you know, he's saying, hey, I won't do this, but he's not going to keep that. Verse 7, and Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all those things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as in times past. And there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines and slew them with a great slaughter, and they fled from him. And the evil spirit from the Lord, and we talked about that, right? Remember, is this a good angel that's doing bad things? Or is this an evil angel that God is just allowing access to Saul? I would lean more towards that because God's not going to make anything evil, right? But he'll use evil, right? You know, I mean, and he can say, okay, you have free reign against Saul. I'm not going to. And this is something very comforting. Do you know why the devil can't possess a Christian? Because there's a barrier there they can't cross. They're not allowed to. Now, I don't know what happens if they try. I don't live in that realm. But I just know that there is a barrier around me, and they can't. Because he won't let them. Now, he's the one that controls that barrier. He can lift it. He lifted it for Job. You know, then you're at the mercy of God if he does that, right? And an evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul as he sat in his house with his javelin in hand. And David had played with his hand. And Saul sought to smite David even to the wall with the javelin. But he slipped away out of Saul's presence. And he smote the javelin into the wall. And David fled and escaped that night. Saul also sent messengers to David's house to watch and to slay him in the morning. Milcah, David's wife, told him, saying, If thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. Again, you're going to have a contrast. That's her dad. He's the king. She's married to David. And she has to decide where her loyalties are. Okay? You know, the Bible does say when you get married, you leave your mother and father and you cling together. Right? When you're married, when you get married, the authority in your life outside of that stops. Because you're one family there. Now, if you allow that interference, and there's a lot of people that do, there's a lot of times that becomes an issue. They can't let go, I'll tell you one, but this will probably get me in trouble. Let's hope she's not listening tonight. It was a long time ago. So when I was in Slippery Rock, or no, this is New Orleans. We didn't make much money. I made $100 a week back then. It was 93? Made $100 a week. It was tight sometimes. And her mom and dad came down and they wanted to buy us groceries. So they did. They bought groceries, put them in the freezer. And while they were there, Maggie had just had a baby. While they were there, I told Maggie, we're going to have this couple over for dinner. And her mom said, well, that's not why we bought those groceries. I told Maggie, write a check. Like right now, write a check. Right? Because at the price of that is something I can't do. Right? I mean, there's no way. You know, because if you're going to give something to somebody, but then put stipulation on that, and then not let that person have that control that they need to over their own family, no thank you. Right? If you're going to give it, you got to give it from your heart and leave it there. You know, trying to tell somebody else what to do with something you gave them, always going to go wrong. And that was a long time ago. She was learning and we were learning, right? I mean, that's her baby, right? Okay? And of course she wants to make sure her baby's okay. You know? I also remember, because she's Canadian, I got the kids toy guns because I'm not Canadian. Whoo! That went through the roof, right? I mean, I never even thought in my mind that that would be a problem, okay? Because I grew up with toy guns, but apparently Canadians don't do that. At least not that Canadian, right? I mean, that was another big issue. And we just had to find that common place where, respectively, we said, okay, I appreciate that, but this is our home, right? Well, she's having to do that here. She's having to find that independence here because her dad is trying to go after her husband. And she has to pick a side. Well, which side do you pick biblically? Got to pick your husband's. Right? I mean, now, that might not be something you want to do, but that is biblical. Right? I mean, at what point do you not follow that? Well, I mean, if it's something illegal or, something immoral or something like that, then you follow the Bible. But if I've had this question asked me before. A lady will come and say, my husband will let me come on Sunday morning. He doesn't want me to come Sunday night. What do I tell her? Lord, what do I tell her? Got to listen to your husband. And that's counterproductive as a pastor, because you want him to come to church, but you also want him to stay married, right? So even though I say, man, I want you in church, but the problem is my authority stops there. I don't have any authority in that home. My advice to her would be, listen to it online or whatever you need to, but if you care about reaching your husband, you're going to need to do what your husband asks him to do. Because that's the biblical line in the Bible. And I just got to trust that God knows what he's doing when you tell them that. And there are a lot of people that have to limit what they do in church because they're married to somebody that's not saved and isn't sold out that way, and they want him home. Maybe he works there in the week and he says, I want to see my wife on Sunday night, so she has to be obedient in doing that. And that's some of the same obstacles that she's facing here with going against her dad. Of course, it did also mean that he would kill David. So, all right, and Milcah took an image and laid it in the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster and covered it with a cloth. And when Saul sent messengers to David. She said, he is sick. And Saul sent the messengers again to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed that I may slay him. I mean, he's intent on killing him. He's not in a good mood, right? He says, hey, go get the bed, bring everything here. We're going to get rid of our enemy, which was very common back then. And when the messengers were coming, behold, there was an image in the bed and a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster. And Saul said unto Milcah, why hast thou deceived me, and so sent away mine enemy, that he has escaped? And Milcah answered Saul, he said unto me, let me go, why should I kill thee? Okay, so what she did is she lied to her dad, right? All right, now here's a question. I did this during COVID. Of course, there wasn't very many people here. Situational ethics. Is it ever okay to lie? Now, you have to balance that in your own head. I am not going to solve that equation for you. That is a you equation. You have to get peace with that. Certainly, if you're smuggling Bibles, you probably don't want to tell the guy at the border where they're at. Right? Okay, that would be common sense. If you're in a time of war, which this would be in a time of war, okay, that would, I mean, telling her dad where David went would kind of be counterproductive to the whole thing of, and that would be common sense. And I think that if you ever were put in that situation, you would know at that moment whether what you were doing was right or wrong. But there are places in the Bible, like the midwives, like if you were hiding Jews during World War II, would you lie to a Nazi soldier and say, I haven't seen any Jews today? Of course I would. Wouldn't tell them. Right? Why would you do that? You know, or, you know, so in Rahab the harlot, remember when the spies were on top of the roof? And they said, hey, have you seen them? And she said, they went that way. Right? Well, I think that in those times and in those circumstances, the intent of the heart is really important. And God would know that. And that would be your barometer. It's just neat to see that you have to, I can't be your conscience and you can't be my conscience. In a situation like that, you're the one that has to live with that answer of why you would do that. Now, our world is changing. Our freedoms are changing in America. If they came and got your guns, are you going to give them all of them? That'd be the decision you would have to make. You know, or would you try your best to hold out on one? Right? Okay, you would have to decide with your conscience with God whether, but there are people, this is one of them, when she said, well, why did you do this? Why did you? Not only did she lie to her dad, but she lied to him multiple times, especially the last one when she said, well, he told me basically if I don't do this, he was going to kill me. Right? So, Dad, what do you want me to do? Of course, none of that was true. That was all just so David could get down the road. Okay, so we'll leave that to your own conscience there. Let's go down just a little bit further because this gets really interesting from here. And so go down to verse 17. And Saul said unto verse 18, so David fled and escaped and came to Samuel to Ramah. So he thought, man, I need to get to Samuel. And told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth. And it was told Saul, saying, behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. And Saul sent messengers to David, and when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing as appointed over them, the Spirit of God was upon the messengers of Saul, and they prophesied. If God does not want something to happen to you, it will not happen to you. It won't happen. I mean, he's trying, but it won't happen. So these guys go down here, and what happens? Now I spent some time studying this out this afternoon about the spirit of prophesying came on them. And everything that you read in commentaries, it's not like they were prophesying about Scripture. It was more that they were in a spirit of worship. They were in a spirit of praising God. That's what the prophets were doing. And they just joined, and then it was something that they couldn't control. Just like a person being possessed by the devil, they can't control that. How many of you believe that actually goes on today? That there are possessed people? Sure. You can't, law enforcement comes across them all the time. You can't hold them down. they're really, really strong. They've got supernatural abilities because there's somebody working inside of them. Well, if that can happen demonically, that not happen spiritually? So all of a sudden, God just takes over and says, I'm going to control your thoughts and your emotions and your hands for the next few minutes. You're going to be under my control. By the way, he controls all creation. Now, moving inside, I don't see a whole lot in the Bible where he's ever done it to somebody who's not a believer. These were Jews, and they were believers. The Spirit just overcame them at that moment, and they forgot what they were doing. And this thing keeps cracking a little bit. Maybe I don't put my hand in my pocket. So verse 19, so that happens. Then go down to verse 21. And it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they prophesied likewise. And a third time, and they prophesied also. Then went he also to Ramah, and came to a great well that is in Shechem. And he asked and said, where are Samuel and David? So this happened many times. Every group of men he sat down, the same thing happened to him. Then he went down there. Then he went also to Ramah and came to a great well that is in Shechem. And he asked and said, where are Samuel and David? And one said, behold, they be at Naioth in Ramah. And he went thither to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God was upon him also. And he went on and prophesied until he came to Naioth in Ramah. Now look at this. And he stripped off his clothes also and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Now, you would agree with me that that's a little strange. Right? Well, here's a couple things to unwind as you're looking at this. What is Saul's big problem at this point? The Spirit of God left him. Right? It left him. It departed from him. But for a few minutes he had it back. Lord, I wonder if he would have repented during this time. I wonder what would have happened. But for a few moments, he felt what it was like before God took the kingdom from him. And it overwhelmed him. Now, I don't understand the whole taking off your clothes and all those things. That must have something to do with culture back then that I don't understand today, right? Wouldn't recommend that in a church service or anywhere, right? That's an odd thing, and don't have the answer to that. But I looked there and I thought, how sad. Because this only lasted for a while. But I wonder what he thought as the Spirit of God took over him again. And how good that must have felt to have an old friend back. And I don't know what would have happened had he had at that moment stopped and repented. But he didn't do that. So, and he stripped off his clothes and prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked all that day. Wherefore they say, is Saul also among the prophets? Go on to chapter 20. And David fled from Naioth in Ramah, and went and came and said before Jonathan, what have I done? What is mine iniquity? And what is my sin before thy father, that he seeketh my life? Sometimes you keep asking a question and you're not going to get an answer. You're not going to understand this world. If you try to figure out why people are unkind to you and mean to you and disappoint you and let you down, it's wasting time. You can ask the question over and over and over again, and it's not going to bring you an answer. Better to just give it to God, right? Because we live in a broken world. The answer is sin is real. That's why Jesus had to die, right? That's why he has to help us every day, because there is no answer to this. You can try to figure it out. Is it something I did? What's wrong with them? Why are they doing this? Or you can just say, listen, I'm going to give this to God, and I'm just going to trust him. He knows my enemies. He knows where I'm at. And guys, you don't always have to know. Because Saul wasn't living right, and that's just part of it. And he said unto him, God forbid that thou shalt not die. Behold, my father will do nothing, either great or small, that he will show it to me. And why should my father hide this thing from among me? it is not so. He's saying, David, listen, I know my dad, and he's crazy. But there's nothing, he's not going to do anything without telling me, and I happen to be your friend. Right? Verse 23. And David sware moreover and said, Thy father certainly knoweth that I have found grace in thine eyes. And he saith, Let not Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly as the Lord liveth, as thy soul liveth, there is but a step between me and death. And when you read a lot about Psalms and you read about his enemies, he's talking about a lot of these things. Have you ever just been overwhelmed with life around you? And you feel like there is but a step. Now, God's not going to, how do we know David's not going to die right here? Lloyd, how do we know David's not going to die here? Anybody got an answer to that? Because he hasn't become king. He said, you're going to be king. Don't forget the promises God gave you. Look for this. How many of you parents, me being one of them, hold on to that verse? Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, what's the rest of it? Have you ever held on to that verse? Because that's the only hope you got. Is that God is going to replay everything that they've heard and everything that they've ever listened to, and he will be faithful to bring that up in their heart over and over again, even if I can't get to them. Now, shame for a parent who doesn't put that in their child. You can't make a child listen in church. You can't make a kid accept the Lord. You can't even make a child follow God, but you can put them around the truth. And the truth lives on. And God can make that be revisited in their heart and mind over and over and over again, and I just got to trust that, right? You know, David could have given himself a little bit of comfort by trusting some promises God told him, right? You know, does God know how much you love your kids? Well, sure. Does he know how much you love your grandkids? Well, sure. Or nieces or nephews or whoever, he knows that. Do you think he doesn't feel your pain? You know, and he's just not going to take a blind eye or a deaf ear to that. You know, he's on your side. He wants them to be reached too. So we can't forget, maybe you feel like there's no hope there. But there are some promises that you can rely on in the Bible, just like David had a promise. He could hold on to that promise, and that was the fact that he was going to be king. Then said Jonathan unto David, Whatsoever thy soul desireth, I even will do it for thee. And David said unto Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is a new moon, and I shall not fail to sit with the king at meat. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field unto the third day at even. If thy father at all miss me, then say, David earnestly asked leave of me, that he might run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all of the family. If he say, Thus it is well, thy servant shall have peace. But if he be very wroth, then be sure that evil is determined by him. Therefore thou shalt deal kindly with thy servant, for thou hast brought thy servant into a covenant of the Lord with thee. Notwithstanding, if there be in me iniquity, slay me thyself, for why shouldest thou bring me to thy father? Again, this is a very close friendship that he has with David. And he's saying, okay, we're going to let God work in this situation. You know, have you ever figured out how to figure out the will of God? There's a lot of things that get blamed on the will of God that he never did. Right? I mean, especially when you're talking about, you know, dating or even in marriage. I've heard people say, well, it's the will of God that I don't date you anymore. Or I've heard people say, I married the wrong person. It's not the will of God. And the will of God gets thrown around all the time. There's a lot of things that he gets blamed for that he never did. Right? You know, but there is a way to know whether or not you're listening to God or you're not listening to God. And all he's doing is stopping and saying, listen, if he's for me, he will act this way. If he's against me, he will act this way, and by that we will know what God wants me to do, and to sit back and watch that. But I would be very careful about just throwing people. There's a lot of things that have failed, and God gets a bad name, and people will say, God told me to do this, or God led me to this, or God had me. I've seen people go to the mission field and say, God told me to go to the mission field, and then they don't make it a year, so that God changed his mind. You know, I know people who said, hey, God's called me to preach, and then later on they're not preaching anymore. Did God change their mind? Or, you know, so if you're going to say God did that, then you need to be sure God did that. And all David's doing is taking some time in this to know what the will of God is. And listen, he actually killed Goliath. He knows the power of God. Now he's seeking his will, okay? And it's something that we should do also. Down in verse 9, Jonathan said, far be it from me, for if I knew certainly that evil were determined by my father to come upon thee, then would I not tell it thee. Then said David to Jonathan, who shall tell me, or what if thy father answered thee roughly? And Jonathan said unto David, come and let us go out unto the field. And they went out, both of them, into the field. And Jonathan said unto David, O Lord God of Israel, when I have sounded my father about tomorrow, any time or the third day, and behold, if there be good toward David, and I then send not unto thee, and show it to thee. The Lord do so and much more to Jonathan, but if it please my father to do evil, then I will show it to thee, and send thee away, that thou mayest go in peace, and the Lord be with thee. And he's just confirming this covenant with David. And thou shalt not only while yet I live, show me kindness of the Lord, that I die not. But also thou shalt not cut off thy kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord hath cut off the enemies of David, every one from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant. Now I want you to look down here in verse 13. Let's read that again. And the Lord do so much more to Jonathan. But if it please my father to do thee evil, then I will show it to thee, and send thee away, that thou mayest go in peace, and the Lord be with thee, as he hath been with my father. And thou shalt not only while I yet live show me thy kindness of the Lord, that I die not, but also thou shalt not cut off thy kindness from my house forever. Now what's he talking about there? This is actually a little prophecy he's doing. What's he talking about? Yeah, so he's talking about his children. So Jonathan's seeing how this is going to go. David's going to be king. His dad's the enemy. At some point, his kingdom's going to fall. And Jonathan says, not only show me the kindness while I live, he says, but after I'm gone, show kindness to my family. And what is one family member that David showed kindness to because of this promise? Mephibosheth. Could you imagine Jesus going to his heavenly Father and saying, when I go down there and I die for them, then will you keep your covenant? Will you not only show me kindness in my life, but in my death? And will you also then look after my family? And who is the Lord's family? You are. Right? That same promise, Mephibosheth, which we'll get into here before too long, that's us. Right? So why did David love Mephibosheth? Why did he do that? Because of a relationship with his son. Why does God love me? Because of a relationship with his son. Why do I get to eat at God's table? Because of the relationship with his son. And Mephibosheth was crippled, an outcast. Nobody else would want him. He wouldn't last long. He'd be the first son that was taken, right? He wasn't going to make it. And then, do you not know, see, when you look out at a mountain, do you not see the beauty of God? When you see a sunset, do you not appreciate his ability to create? I love how he crafted the Bible. In living history, he embedded his son all over the Bible. From the lambs in the Old Testament to the story of Abraham and Isaac. And right here, the master weaver is putting into this canvas and into this story something that relates to his son. He is ordaining each word and each event so that we can look back at it and see and stop and for a few moments learn things along the way. And then in the middle of 1 Samuel, we can appreciate salvation. We can appreciate the grace of God. We can appreciate the story about Mephibosheth. And then now we have the luxury of being able to read to the end. But think about as this is being written. And it's being written, and all we have is the promise. He hasn't died yet. We don't know who Mephibosheth is yet. But here's a promise embedded in there where David says to Jonathan, then I will keep this promise. In the Old Testament, they were given promises that they never seen fulfilled. They were later on down the road fulfilled, and now we can look back at them and we can see them fulfilled. I just think that's neat. Let's just go just a little bit more. And then verse 15, but also thou shalt not cut off thine kindness from my house forever, not when the Lord hath cut off the enemies of David, every one from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, let the Lord even require it at the hand of David's enemies. And Jonathan caused David to swear again because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is a new moon, and thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty. And when thou hast stayed 3 days, then thou shalt go down quickly and come to the place where thou didst hide thyself, when the business was in hand, and thou shalt remain by the stone Ezel. And I will shoot 3 arrows on the side thereof, as though I shot at a mark. Because he can't let anybody know that he's warning David. And behold, I will send a lad, saying, go find out the 3 arrows. If I expressly say unto the lad, behold, the arrows are on this side of thee, take them, then come thou, for there is peace to thee, and no hurt, as the Lord liveth. But if I say thus unto the young man, behold, the arrows are beyond thee, go thy way, for the Lord hath sent thee away. And we'll just go ahead and end it there. As he's planning, and as he is hey, Jamie, can you turn this mic down? I'm going to just shut this off because it's crackling. As he's planning to go see his dad, he has a strategy on how he's going to accomplish this, right? He's saying, okay, if this happens, we're going to do this. If this happens, we're going to do that, right? So you think when Jesus went home to heaven, he gave us a job to do. He said, go into all the world and preach the gospel. Just as they're doing to figure out how they're going to do this, how this is going to play out, what's their plan. They had a plan. They executed that plan. They had a backup plan to that plan. They were prepared to deal with what was coming. Let me ask you this question when it goes to what God left us to do. Do you know there's an enemy in the way out there that does not want us to evangelize the world? So it's not going to be easy. If you think you're just going to go out there and do it and it's easy, and if you think that any church or any person is going to be successful at that without a plan, is also silly. You got to have a plan. And the plan has to be, okay, are you going to give up just because it gets hard? No, that's not the plan. The plan is when it gets harder, you trust more, but you don't quit, you push on. Amen. And even that's what they're doing here. I mean, they're spending a lot of time coming up with this elaborate plan on how to carry out the will of God so David can be safe. I think about the gospel, and we put that much thought into that. Do we have a plan? Do we have a backup plan? Are we committed to that? Think about the promises made there in this, right? Jonathan is entrusting David with things that David needs to do even if he's not there. Isn't that what Jesus did for us? He said, look, I got to go. When I was here, I cared for this world. I got to go. I want you to promise me that you'll go because I can't. That's what he did, right? That's a pretty humbling thing. Brother Arnold, will you close this in prayer and we'll pick this up next Wednesday?